I call Melissa Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is a great pleasure to rise in support of the second reading of the Social Housing Reform Bill, sir. And I'd like to reflect on the previous speaker from the opposition, Phil Twyford's speech on that bill, and what a contribution that was. That was really rich, coming from that member who belongs to a party who could only be classed as the slum landlords who did nothing in this sector for 9 years on the Treasury benches when they were in government. Sir, as we all know, the old model of massive state housing estates doesn't actually work. That's why we need to make changes to this model. We shouldn't be putting all of our eggs into one basket, but this is precisely the problem with the way housing assistance has been delivered to those people who need it most in this country. We need to diversify the way we deliver housing assistance, and we're going to be providing the best service to New Zealanders, and that's what this bill is actually addressing, sir. This bill is going to make fundamental and welcome changes to the way the government delivers housing assistance to those that actually need it by letting community housing providers play a bigger role. We've seen worldwide how well community housing providers do a better job meeting these needs because they provide a wraparound service for their clients. Just take a look internationally. New Zealand is lagging in the community housing sector. We have less than 5% of social housing provided by the community sector, sir. Compare this with Australia, where there is actually about 20%, and if you compare to the UK, who actually has about 60% social housing. This is precisely why I'm excited with the Social Housing Reform Bill, which will make a substantive shift in government's housing assistance from a state housing to a social housing model. So let's sort of talk about the detail a little bit of the bill. Before I sort of get along, I like to talk about the misinformation that Mr. Phil Twyford was actually sort of talking about. I think he mentioned something about how Labour cannot support a bill that turfs out 80-year-old people from their homes. I mean, what a bunch of hogwash. It's complete misconception. It's a complete misinformation because the Social Services Committee made a number of technical and substantive amendments to the bill where the committee recommended allowing minister to identify people who will not be subject to reviewable tenancies such as specifically mentions vulnerable, elderly and disabled tenants. What this really means is that it allows the government to clarify regulation that vulnerable tenants such as elderly, those the one that Mr. Twyford talked about, would not have get their tenancies reviewed. And so the idea that they're going to be turfed out, the idea that they actually sort of talk about is utter rubbish. Sir, this bill talks about, the main objective of this bill is to improve access to social housing for those who really need it and support people to become independent of state housing when their situations actually improve. Contrary to the opposition's deluded views, this bill isn't about kicking out tenants, as I said. It's called the Social Housing Reform Bill. And that is exactly what it's about, reforming social housing in New Zealand. This bill is going to change the way assistance will be given. Once this bill comes into effect, the level of assistance won't be dependent on whether the house is actually state-owned, but on the real needs of the family, their income and quality of the house. And this is all part of the government's promise to deliver a better public service, sir. This is something our government has shown great commitment to, way better than the housing stock that the previous government left behind, which wasn't even insulated, where people were living in cold conditions, where they were getting sick. This bill is also about facing up to such facts as we've got more than 4,000 state housing tenants paying market rent, sir, some of whom are on high incomes and actually doing, and we're actually doing something about it. And it's about being fair. And it's not fair that there are currently 2,100 families, about 6,000 people on the Housing New Zealand waiting list with a serious need for a state home, while there are tenants that can actually afford to find a decent house with their high incomes but who happen to be living in them. It's also part of this government's commitment of better services to Kiwis. To deliver better services, we'll be making a record investment of $2.9 billion in Housing New Zealand for the next 3 years to improve access to social housing, to develop a pathway for New Zealanders in social housing to get independence, sir. This matters to us because delivering housing assistance to Kiwis that need it the most is where we ought to be concentrating. As I mentioned in the first reading of the bill, this facilitates housing in the right places. It is in fact in the right size, conditions, and is where it is the most in need. More targeted and efficient use of our resources. It also means getting results where we need to see them the most. And it won't change the fact that housing will always be available for those people who need it for the duration of the time that they actually require. Quite frankly, this bill will address the very issue that Labour didn't have the appetite to actually fix. Let's not forget that when opposition was in government, they didn't do anything substantive to ease the housing issue. There weren't even any reviews of its placement criteria of people into housing, meaning taxpayers' money that could have gone to target those in need were used ineffectively. This didn't help Kiwi families then, and it certainly isn't helping them now. And let's not forget the opposition's poor track record with leaky homes. It was our government, our national government, that actually tackled this issue. And once again, it's this current government that is tackling the big issues. I wholeheartedly support this bill. I commend it to the House.
The Honourable Annette King.
Mr Speaker, it was interesting listening to Melissa Lee read out the research notes.